idea behind my book on Orientalism is to seek out the origins and the coherence of descriptions of the Orient that began to appear in Europe in the end of the 18th, early 19th century, that were different from the descriptions of the Orient that had appeared before. Orientalism is really about the manufacture of the other, and that other is really of great convenience to oneself, and it can only be done it is mainly done for purposes of domination, and that knowledge and domination in the imperial context almost always go together. You know, the question of differences, of human difference, really, and whether that notion of difference can extend to very large collectivities, such as West and East, or Orient and Occident, it's something about which I'm very doubtful. They're historical differences, let's say, rather than genetic and metaphysical differences, which is what is often meant. You know, there's a sense of Western values and all that stuff. I mean, that, to me, that's basically demagoguery. I mean, because if you deconstruct those, you'll see that, you know, they're common to everyone. I mean, there's nobody, for example, who doesn't believe in the idea of human freedom, or human dignity, or compassion, or human fraternity, or love, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, so it's a much more complex thing than saying East versus West. That's what I'm trying to say. I mean, there is belligerency and there is aggression, but it's not genetic. I think it's manufactured. It's a political reflex developed for other reasons, whether resources, oil, for example, or geostrategic ideas about who should control what area for what reason. To me, it's much more interesting and impressive how cultures, you know, constantly feed each other across what are supposed to be lines of demarcation, and to me are in fact lines of coexistence and complementarity and counterpoint, which is the word I use from you know, music. I mean, in other words, I think it's a kind of horizontal thing rather than these vertical entities which face each other across My question is can you, it's really the core question of Orientalism, do these designations of East and West, of Oriental and Occidental, the types, the nationalities, if they are taken, you know, to the degree that they have been taken, you know, not just as a loose designation saying, oh, well, he's French, he can't possibly understand Chinese. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the profound study of the other as very other, and studying the circumstances of how this kind of knowledge grew and how it's associated with empire. So my real question was, can we maintain that kind of knowledge and at the same time maintain humanism? Isn't there something profoundly anti-humanist about knowledge that's based on difference and the inferiority and submission of the other and the alienation of the other? And my question was, maybe not. Maybe we can't be the two together. And it's a question that has still bothered me. And I've, you know, even now, 25 years later, I'm working on trying to define the relationship between humanism and knowledge. And to see knowledge not as a kind of fixed, frozen, I mean, the equivalent of a row of books like that, which sit quietly, you know, the way Borges saw the library, sort of a threatening, formidable presence, but rather as something constantly in motion, constantly being added to, dynamic, where you and the other are always in dialogue, based on comprehension, on common ideas about humanity, you know, about human history, about human ambition, about above all, human freedom. If you're an Arab or a Palestinian in this country, since I've been here, you feel really as if you're on the wrong side. I'll give you a very graphic example. In 1967, I was a young assistant professor at Columbia at the time of the war. I would come out of the subway and walk to where I lived in the Columbia area at the time. And very often I would see people with little transistor radios in their ear, standing in the doorway or on the street listening to the news of the war. And very often I would hear people saying, "How are we doing?" And, you know, people responding, "Oh, we're doing great." And they were Americans, but they were so completely identified with Israel and the victories of Israel that I felt, you know, as an Arab, you know, sort of not only embarrassed, but I wish I could disappear. It was a perfect moment to sort of deny who you were. And as I became more politically active, it was also much more difficult for me because I was then sort of openly identified, not just with the losing side, but with the discredited side. The narrative in the popular mind, which of course the media carried and reinforced all the time, was basically that, you know, that Israel and the Jews were kind of democratic and plucky and pioneering and white people who were like us, whereas the Arabs were, you know, fanatical and violent and so on. So the whole idea of trying to give, quote unquote, the other side is very, very difficult. And you always feel that you're guilty trying to prove you're innocent.